Welcome to the second year of the annual EU Days conference. This conference will focus on the major societal trends that affect Lund, Skåne, and Europe, and how the work with the common challenges that we have will help strengthen both Swedish business and research globally. The purpose is also to strengthen our EU knowledge. And we do this by focusing on cross-sector and all-level collaboration on this event. Last year, this was a one-day event. This year, it's a two-day event. And the second day, we focus on the youth, because it is indeed the year of the youth, 2022. We want to promote knowledge exchange. And this is why you're all here in the auditorium and also watching online. We need to discuss and to collaborate to solve the major societal changes, right? My name is Katarina Rolfsdotter Jansson. I have the honor of hosting this event this year again. I am chair of the independent think tank Global Utmaning, and I've worked with sustainable development as a journalist, moderator, and lecturer and author for 25 years. And I'm a student of Lund University originally, many, many years ago, obviously. So, the EU Day is arranged by the City of Lund, the European Commission's representation in Sweden, Europe Direct, and also by, of course, Lund University. And we have many partners also behind this event, and now I have to read because there are many partners. The European Parliament, CIEPS, Mobile Heights, Digit Hub, Eurus, MUCF, LSU, Trelleborg Municipality, Interreg Öresund, Kattegatt Skagerrak, Tillväxtverket, Trans-Europe Hall, and the Center for European Studies at Lund University, and also by IIIEE. And if you want to share your input, which of course we'd like you to do, on social media, please use the hashtag EU Days Lund. And the setup of these 2 days is that you could choose whatever you fancy. We have 4 parallel tracks. And this event here is, of course, in the Lund Auditorium. We also have content in Palestra, which is straight ahead out to the left, and also at AF Borgen, which is the red brick building across from the yard. And in AF Borgen, we have seminars on Gustavscenen, which is on the ground level, and Nya Fest, which is 1 level up. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce the real hosts of this event. 3 gentlemen, please join me here on stage. Philip Sandberg, Mayor of the City of Lund. Christian Danielsson, he is head of the European Commission's representation in Sweden. And of course, also, we have with us the Vice-Chancellor of the university here, Erik Renström. Wonderful to see you all 3 here.
Thank you.
And I'd like to start by you sharing your thoughts for 5 minutes and an initial presentation. Please start.
Thank you, Katarina. Commissioner, Philip, Mayor of Lund, Erik Renström, Vice-Chancellor of Lund University, students, ladies and gentlemen. Europe is facing major challenges, challenges that we haven't seen for very, very long. War is raging on European soil. It is a war unleashed by Russia against Ukraine, but it is also a war on Europe. It is a war on our energy, on our economy, a war on our values, and a war on our future. As President von der Leyen underlined in her State of Union address on the 14th of September, for Europe, it will call for solidarity and courage. Solidarity with Ukraine, solidarity between EU member states, solidarity with those households that will suffer most due to, for instance, higher energy prices or higher prices of foodstuff. It calls for courage. Courage to stand together. Courage to continue and strengthen the sanctions against Russia. Courage to provide the necessary support to Ukraine. And courage to take the necessary measures within the EU. And that is particularly relevant these days when it comes to energy. At the same time, President von der Leyen underlined, we need also to stay the course. Stay the course on the Green Deal. Stay the course on the digital transformation that is both so essential for a sustainable and competitive economy. The climate package, the single market, and the economy as such are all essential in these respects. But also European cooperation on skills, research, and other elements that are essential for our well-being. And here, of course, the University of Lund is so important as well, also other universities. And we need also, President von der Leyen underlined, to stand up for democracy, stand up for rule of law, for human rights, and respect for minorities. Externally, it means to work with like-minded countries and mobilize for the global good. And that means for the Western Balkan, for Ukraine, for Moldova, and for Georgia, that they have a future in the European Union. For others, it means working together on the great challenges of this century, such as climate change and digitalization. Internally, we need to better shield ourselves from malign interference. We must not allow autocracies' Trojan horses to attack our democracies from within. And we need to protect the rule of law and fight corruption within the European Union. So the European agenda is substantial and essential. Discussions and reflections on all these issues are important. And that is why these EU Days in Lund are so welcome. They come at a crucial moment in European cooperation, and they come in a crucial moment here in Sweden, 3 months before Sweden takes over the presidency of the Council. Let me thank you, Philip. Let me thank you, Erik, and the others who have been involved in organizing all this. And I think this is something that is the second time, and I look forward to having very interesting discussions today and tomorrow that will be thought-provoking and intense. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Christian Danielsson.
Thank you very much, Christian Danielsson and Erik Renström. Dear Commissioner, Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to EU Days Lund. For a little less than a year ago, I stood on this very stage together with Mr. Erik Renström and Mr. Christian Danielsson and welcome guests to the first EU Day of Lund. And today, we are twice as many and with twice as many seminars. I can conclude that the interest in the EU and how the Union affects our society is large and growing. In a such city as Lund, it's natural that there is an interest in the European Union. Here, researchers and industry daily work to solve Europe's greatest challenges, such as the climate crisis and the need for a rapid digital transition. In the city of Lund, we also work with all societal challenges. This year, I especially want to highlight how Lund, together with Malmö and Helsingborg, earlier this year was selected to be a part of EU's mission to have 100 climate-neutral cities by the year 2030. Together, we should be the forerunners for the rest of Europe and show how cities can become climate-neutral. Lund is connected to the rest of the world through our industry, Lund University, its students, researchers, our NGOs, and not least through many of you here in the audience. I want to give 2 examples of the international and European footprint in Lund. The first one is that Lund has been named Europe's most creative and cultural city compared to cities in the same size. A title we would not have received if it would not have been for all the creative individuals who live and work in the city. Another example is the 2 international research facilities in our innovation district, Brunshög, Max 4, and European Spallation Source, which will expand international connections and bring even more world-leading research to Lund. In the city, we believe that all this means that Lund have an important role in Skåne, in Sweden, and in Europe. We are a growth engine that must and should be a forerunner in societal development, for ecological and social sustainability, as well as for economic growth. With the EU Days Lund, we wish to encourage everyone to learn about Europe's challenges and how we in Lund and Skåne can contribute to Europe's development. And this is important because EU's future can't and should not be formed only by national governments and states. Europe is also a cooperation between cities and regions, a union built by its citizens. When the nations fail to cooperate, the cities can go forward at a faster pace. And if Lund doesn't take the lead, who will? Not least to fight climate change and promote climate adaptation and human rights. To affect the EU, we need to engage with its institutions and with the cities and regions in other member states. Finally, the war has shown that together and united we are much stronger. My hope is that these 2 days in Lund will be a good arena for deepening collaborations. And this is a unique opportunity to meet decision makers in different levels, to take part in the discussions, express your opinions, and ask your questions. So thank you very much, and welcome to EU Days Lund.
Well, thank you very much, Philip Sandberg. Please proceed.
Honorable Commissioner, Ministers, Excellencies, a warm welcome to the Lund University Hall. A wind of change. Predicting change and what the future will hold is exactly what every scientist does in their own field every day. It is also what has been the most important task for me during the almost 5 years that I have been the leader of large academic organizations. Trying to get a firm grip on the future is like chasing your own shadow. Just as you think you caught it, it slips out of your hands. There are changes that we can predict, such as the advance of digitalization, automation, demographic changes, and, not least, the climate change. Then there are changes that just hit us like a meteorite impact. Many of us could foresee that sooner or later a pandemic would sweep across the world. But exactly how it would affect us was almost impossible to predict. Transmission routes, contagiousness, and severity of the disease interact in a complex manner that leads to completely different measures that we either barely notice or that severely impact our life. The resilience that universities and the society at large prove to have is also difficult to predict. It depends on factors that are difficult to measure, such as psychological preparedness and digital literacy. And then, who seriously believed that in 2022, a cruel war of aggression would be fought within Europe on our doorstep? Who knew on February 23 that the world's production of the inert gas neon used for the manufacture of electronics, or starch, a basic product in the food industry, takes place precisely in Ukraine? Who thought that Sweden would be on its way into NATO and that Europe would united have to stand up to preserve the democratic society? The European Union has been a tangible presence within Lund University for several decades, and almost all researchers have personal experience from working in projects with colleagues from all corners of Europe. The various crises that have hit the world in recent years have, with the exception of Brexit, strengthened the European research community and the cooperation. Why? The EU Commission has coordinated its work in research, innovation, and higher education, and succeeded in formulating several impactful points: the digital transformation and the Green Deal. The universities have been singled out as important agents of change in this respect. An even more important role of the university is to close the divides that concern many in our time. The divides between city and country, between country, and between those who have the knowledge and skills that the future will reward, and those who do not yet have it. The most important thing, however, is that universities' autonomy must be preserved such that they can continue to be the beacons of freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and the democratic society. In that context, I would like to recommend an exhibition at the University Library, just a few steps up in that direction. It opened on Saturday, and it is about the trade union solidarity and how brave people in Poland managed to establish democracy in the former Eastern Bloc. News for me was also the important role that spirited people, civilians of citizens of Lund and colleagues at Lund University played in that respect. So please go and visit it. The song Wind of Change by Scorpions became an anthem for the rise of democracy and the reunification of Europe. And I conclude by quoting, "The magic of the moment on a glory night, when the children of tomorrow dream away in the wind of change." Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you very much. Philip Sandberg, what do you look forward to the most during these 2 days that are ahead of us?
Well, first of all, I remember when I was 18 years old, I had just been traveling around in Europe with Interrail by train, and I was telling this to my grandmother, and she was listening, and then she said that when I was in your age, and I was sitting in my room, my grandmother ran into the room crying, and she said that the bombs have just felt over Helsinki, her hometown, and she said that never take freedom and democracy for granted. It is very vulnerable. And you're living in a very bright future, but you need to take care of it. And I think I have taken that with me my whole life, and I think that is so important today as well. This is an arena that is amazing to create new collaborations and to really defend our freedom and our democracy.
Thank you very much, Philip. Christian, what do you hope to achieve by being a co-arranger of the EU Days?
Well, I hope that it's going to be interesting for you who all are here, and that you will come out of these 2 days with a little bit more of knowledge, with a little bit more of having the opportunity to say and express what you think are important. And maybe also that we who are working on a daily basis on European issues have had the opportunity to get your ideas and brought them into us in our thinking. So a kind of creative process coming out of these days, that's what I hope will be the result, in order for us to better take on these challenges that we are facing today, which are probably the most difficult ones that we have seen for many, many years.
Thank you very much. And Erik, what does the EU mean for your organization?
On a shallow level, it is very important for financing quite a lot of our research activities, and it has been for a long time. But in recent years, it's become more and more important that the really important aspect is the ideas and the values that comes with the EU. absolutely highly relevant today is the fight for democracy and academic freedom. They go hand in hand. So this is definitely what is the most important contribution of the EU today.
Well, thank you very much, Erik Renström, Philip Sandberg, Christian Danielsson.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before I proceed to introduce our keynote speaker, I'd like to encourage you to ask questions when I initiate that there is time for questions to be taken. And when there is time, a hand microphone will be handed to the person I point to. And then please stand up and state your name and organization, or if you're a student, please state what faculty you're representing to. Thank you very much. And we now will clear the scene, the stage a little bit here for our keynote speaker. So there is more room to move. Here you go. And here you go. So. Our first keynote speaker is a Swedish politician who has been serving as European Commissioner for Home Affairs since 2019. And previously, she has served as a minister for the Swedish government for many, many years in many positions. I'll state a few. Minister for Schools, Minister for Welfare and Elderly Health Care, and also Minister for Employment. Please give Ylva Johansson a warm hand.
Thank you. A war is being fought in Europe. A war Russia is fighting without pity and without mercy. A war against people, as Putin bombs hospitals, schools, power stations, and water supply. In April, we learned about the hell of Bucha. And now, as Ukrainian soldiers liberate new towns and territories, there are new reports of torture and murder. New reports of mass graves, most recently in Izium. Russia is not only waging war against Ukraine, Russia is also waging war against women. Russian soldiers using rape as a weapon of war, invading your country, invading your home, invading your body, one after the other. And when propagandists deny the Ukrainian language exists, or Ukrainian as a people, then you know that this war is not simply for territory. It's a war of annihilation, to destroy Ukraine as a nation. When armies invade a sovereign state without reason, without even a declaration of war, this is not a war against any one country. It's a war against the international rule-based order. It's a war, this war is a wake-up call. Here in Sweden, we had peace for more than 200 years. But we must not think that just because we're a peaceful country, this war doesn't affect us. Just to remind you, here in Lund, we are closer to the EU border to Ukraine than to the Swedish land border with Finland. Ukraine is close. And this is not only a war in Europe, it's also a war against Europe. It's clear that Russian war aims don't end at Donetsk or Luhansk, or even with the destruction of Ukraine as a state. Destabilization of NATO is a key for Russia, but ambitions are bigger. Day in, day out in the Russian media, Putin's ideologies demand the restoration of the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire. We must not only dismiss this as propaganda. When dictators state their intentions so openly, we must take them very seriously indeed. And we must not be naive. Putin wants to destroy the European Union. That's why he wants to divide us. But why does he see EU as such a threat? What is he so scared of? The EU doesn't have any army. We don't have a navy or an air force. What we do have is liberty, prosperity, and democracy, making the European Union the biggest inspiration to people outside our borders, suffering under corrupt dictators. It's not for nothing that the opposition in Belarus carries EU flags on their protest marches, as did Ukrainians in Maidan Square, and even Russians protesting against Putin. The very existence of the European Union is one of the greatest threats to Putin's rule, and he knows it. That's why he wants to divide us, and that's why we must not let him succeed in this. Russian disinformation and propaganda, Russian trolls and bots interfere in the European political debate, not just telling lies, but blurring the distinction between truth and lies. So no one really knows what's true and false anymore. And now, Russia is using energy as a weapon against the entire European Union, resulting in skyrocketing prices, in the hope that high energy bills will undermine support for Ukraine, support for sanctions, and undermine confidence in our governments. In Europe, we are paying a price. But let's always remember that the price that they are paying in Ukraine right now is so much higher. The only possible outcome of this war is Putin must lose. If he does not, he will remain a threat. Other countries may follow his example. Maybe I don't need to mention a specific country, you can think of yourself. To wage wars of aggression and invade their neighbors, unraveling the international order as we know it, that has kept us safe since the end of the Second World War. Russia has lost thousands of soldiers. Putin does not care about the lives of his own soldiers. He does not care about the lives of Ukrainians, and he will certainly not care about the lives of Europeans or Swedes. That is why Sweden and Finland's decision to join NATO is so important. Simply giving in to Putin's demands is not an option. We already know we can't believe a word he says. For weeks and months, he swore he will not invade. As they built up their armies in Belarus surrounding Kiev, and when President Biden and others called him out and said they will invade, they laughed, they sneered, they said it was Russophobic. And then they invaded. So we don't just think we can't trust him, we know we can't trust him. I also know Putin can't win because of the bravery of the Ukrainian people who are fighting to defend their families, their children, their friends, and their wives. I was in Kiev only 1 month ago, and I met with these people, the widows, a lot of women that have been fleeing, their husbands fighting. Some of them have been fleeing to the European Union and then going back again to support their country. And they are so brave, and they are so courageous, and they are so committed. Putin hoped to divide us, but instead he found a Europe united, showing the greatest solidarity and unity. In the first week of the war, actually the first week, I went to almost all of the EU borders towards Ukraine, to Romania, Slovakia, to Poland. I saw the endless queues of people wanting to crossing. Women, children, old people. It was heartbreaking, but the welcome was so heartwarming. People all over Europe opening their hearts and their arms and their homes to Ukrainian refugees. Also here in Sweden, also here in Lund. I lost the paper here. Sorry. I will find it. Okay. I go on.
I can say that please prepare questions for the minister. So we have questions prepared when the speech is finished. I just want to address this. So keep your questions prepared.
And we're showing this same solidarity as a European Union. When I woke up this Thursday morning, the 24th of February, I know that bombs were falling. I immediately know that refugees will come. And as they came, our estimations went up. First we thought there might be 1 million, there might be 2 million, there might be 3 million. And I know that we had to take drastic and decisive action in the biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War in Europe. On Sunday, 3 days after the invasion, we called for an extraordinary council meeting. I suggested to ministers that we should activate a temporary protection directive, which has been there for 20 years, but never ever been used. When millions are on the move, that gives immediate protection to people, immediate right to stay, right to housing, right to work, and right to schooling for the children. Member states were a bit hesitant at first, I have to admit. But we worked very hard during the coming days. And 4 days later, we had an ordinary council meeting where I put the proposal on the table, and all member states unanimously agreed to the proposal. So this temporary protection directive was never used in the Syrian crisis in 2015, but now it's used in this historic decision, when the need was high. And we did what was needed, and we did what was right. Today, 4.2 million Ukrainians has got a temporary protection in an EU member state. The member state with the highest number of Ukrainian refugees per capita is the Czech Republic. Second is Poland. Third is Estonia. Fourth is Lithuania. Fifth is Bulgaria. Sixth is Latvia. These are the countries where they have the highest and doing the most to support the Ukrainian refugees right now. We took united actions across the board, surprising the world and surprising ourselves. As President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said last week in a State of the Union speech, during the financial crisis, it took us years to act. During the pandemic, it took us weeks. After the invasion, it took us only some days and hours to take historical decisions, like the unprecedented sanctions to cripple Russia's ability to wage aggressive war, banning import of oil and limited access to advanced technology, sanctions that are working. Russia is facing the largest drop in GDP since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's running out of precision weapons and forced to buy artillery from North Korea. We issued travel bans and froze assets for over 1,200 people linked to the regime. And being a tourist in the EU is not a fundamental right. A few weeks ago, I proposed to make it more difficult, more expensive, and more time-consuming for Russians to get visa to Europe. And member states need to refuse people who are a security risk. Do you remember how Russia used chemical weapons? When Russian agents poisoned Sergei and Yulia Skripal with Novichok, you remember that? A British woman died. The agents said they were simply tourists, admiring the spires of Salisbury Cathedral. And now, Russia Today's boss suggests to send some professionals to admire the spires in Tallinn. We can do without such tourists here. And may I end on this on Ukraine saying and remind you, one day we're going to support rebuilding Ukraine. That's going to cost a lot of money. That's going to be a big challenge for the European Union and for each member state. And it's going to cost a lot. But we all know not rebuilding Ukraine will cost us many times more. This is important. I also would like to touch upon the changing role of the European Union, especially the Commission. A Dutch academic, Luc van Middelaar, had said that the European Union is rather good at the politics of rules, but not so good at the politics of events. Good at making rule books to build the single market, but not so good at dealing with crisis. The financial crisis, the 2015 migration crisis. My experience over the last 2.5 years as I've been commissioner, this has completely changed. We have become experts at the politics of events. The EU is changing, and especially the European Commission, from lawmaker to operational actor. We saw it during COVID, when we jointly purchased vaccines, issued a COVID pass that you can use on your phone and it's valid in all EU countries, and by keeping free movements going. And when Lukashenko tricked migrants to cross the EU border, trapping them in freezing forest, we managed to close down Lukashenko's operations by reaching out to third countries, to the airline companies, and by supporting stranded migrants to go back home. And I see it now in our response to this war. The European Union is more important than ever before. Europe must be united and decisive on the inside and on the outside. Show the world that dreams of democracy can become a reality, but also showing that we take the rule of law and democracy seriously. Last Sunday, 2 days ago, we had an extraordinary college meeting to decide about a proposal to freeze some of the money, quite a lot of money, for Hungary until they have restored the situation when it comes to anti-corruption and the rule of law. But also by welcoming the Western Balkans, Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia into our union. We must be an even stronger global player, work with our partners around the world on the great challenges of our time. Because we can only change these challenges together. And one of the greatest challenges today is one of my portfolio. How do we keep our people safe? As Commissioner for Home Affairs, I am responsible for security. Security is about solidarity. It's about cohesion. It's what keeps a society together. Only very few very rich people can care for their own security. Live in a guarded community or have surveillance or whatever. All of us others, we rely on society. We rely on police, on society, on law enforcement. That's why we have to help to keep ourselves secure. And this is important. I think that security is like what keeps a society together. It's cohesion. But when you are not secure, or when you have the feeling that society is not even trying to keep myself or my family safe. Or if you have the sense that some groups in society are being more protected than I am, this is a poison to society. So that's why it's so important to strengthen law enforcement and security cooperation. We know this here in Sweden by bitter experience. There's been close to 50 deadly shootings so far this year. And this is, of course, unacceptable. Especially when innocents die, like the 12-year-old Adriana. It was 2 years ago. She lived in Botkyrka, where I grew up. She went to the McDonald's while walking her dog, and when the criminals started shooting. Shooting is not only a danger in Sweden. Criminals kill people also in other member states, including journalists, lawyers, politicians, undermining democracy and the rule of law. We need to get guns off the streets and out of criminal hands. And we can only do that together in Europe. Already 2 years ago, I launched an action plan against firearms. I'm going to propose new rules on the import and export of firearms to fight smuggling and control guns entering and leaving the EU. And I am actually taking Sweden to court for failing to implement the current firearms directive. We have to be serious about fighting gun crime. Member states must fully implement the directive, which sets minimum standards for buying, owning, and trading guns. More than 50% of all firearms in the European Union are illegal. This is the situation, 56% today. We also know that weapons from the Western Balkans and the Balkan War were being smuggled into the European Union, even though the war ended more than 30 years ago. It's still happening. So I'm working now very closely with Ukrainian authorities, with Ukrainian government, to prevent that from happening when the war in Ukraine is over. And we're also working very close with Moldova and setting up also a security hub in Chisinau. We need to stop the organized criminals who fire these guns, usually in fight about drugs or money. Organized crime is being more and more violent, more and more international, and more professional. These organized criminal groups are organized more or less like multinational businesses. And war will make things worse. War is a threat to society, but an opportunity for criminals who benefit from the chaos and poverty war brings. 70% of the organized criminal groups in Europe are active in at least 3 member states. And if you talk to Swedish police, they will tell you every local criminal group has cross-border links. If criminal works cross borders, police can't stay behind. National police forces work together successfully today. Police access to criminal communication services has given us more impressive crime-fighting successes by EU and international police forces, with essential support of Europol, the EU's crime-fighting agency. First, EncroChat, you might have heard about it. The chat service criminals use to talk to each other, protected by end-to-end encryption. Easy to use and almost impossible to hack. What the criminals didn't know was that national police forces managed to access the service. And police said it was like sitting around a table, listen when criminals were talking amongst themselves. Police saw criminals plotting drug deals, violence, murder, and torture. Watched them talking about getting a cement tube for waterboarding, a pair of clippers for cut off fingers and toes, saying everyone will get their turn sooner or later. No mercy. Thanks to these messages, police could stop them. Up till now, police have made around 10,000 arrests all over Europe. After that, a lot of criminals moved to another service, Sky ECC, which has 175,000 users. But police accessed that too and closed that down too, capturing messages between criminals, helping to solve crimes. And one of these crimes is, I already mentioned, the killing of the 12-year-old Adriana. The prosecutor said that the information from Sky ECC gave the investigation a new momentum. A prosecution of 3 suspects will likely start next month. Swedish police have told me Encrochat is a game changer, confirming police intelligence that conflicts over drugs are the main cause of violent attacks and that drug trafficking is increasing, showing that criminals are trying to influence politicians and public officials and lawyers. 60% of the criminal groups are engaged in corruption, triggering nearly 400 arrests in Sweden and putting criminals behind bars. A combined total of 2,200 years in prison sentences out of this successful police cooperation with Encrochat, Sky ECC, and the Trojan Shield. These cases show the vital importance of Europol. Without Europol, these criminals would still be on the streets. Who knows how many more deadly shootings? Europol provides support and allows national police forces to operate on a continental scale. At Europol, they managed to decrypt so far 1 billion messages between criminals in the Sky case. Member states don't have the capacity to decrypt these messages. Sweden alone sent content of 70 Sky devices to Europol for analysis. We updated recently the mandate for Europol to make sure that Europol can continue to store and analyze large volume of data and can also develop artificial intelligence. Because it's clearly impossible for a police officer or even a large team of them to analyze 1 billion messages. For that, you need artificial intelligence that can detect keywords for murder in different language or in criminal slang. My number 1 priority is the fight against child sexual abuse. In 2 years' time, voluntary efforts by internet companies to detect, report, and remove child sexual abuse will come to an end. In the European Union if we don't adopt new legislation. If anybody of you have young children at home, they are probably playing Roblox. Many children do. They have lots of fun in this virtual world. Adults also play there. For some adults, it's not a playground, but a hunting ground. Roblox has installed a tool to detect grooming in chats, so that parents can feel safe when your kids are playing. But in 2 years' time, unless we act, this will no longer be possible in the European Union. Then temporary legislation expires that allows companies to detect child sexual abuse online, including grooming. And then we will fail our children. Recently, a 29-year-old man from Malmö was convicted to 11 years in prison for 303 crime offenses against 51 children in 10 different countries, most of them younger than 15 years. All the crimes were committed online. He forced and manipulated children all over the European Union and in the US and other countries into sexual acts. In Germany, a man groomed a 14-year-old girl online through an online game. He has just confessed to murder her. Grooming is far from the only threat. Abusers rape children, also very young children, and newborn babies, and share the pictures and videos online. Just last week, the trial started in Germany against the 4 leaders of Boys Town, an online pedophile network with 400,000 users. That's bigger than Malmö. Some are there to watch, which is also a crime. But we know from research that the step from watching to abusing is very small. And the problem is getting worse. Last year, internet companies detected and reported 85 million images and videos of child sexual abuse worldwide, an increase of 30% since the year before. In Sweden, the number of child abuse victims increased from 19,000 10 years ago to 23,000 last year. The Council of Europe estimates that 1 child out of 5 is a victim of child sexual abuse. Most victims are about 0 and 14 years old. The increase could be explained by the twisted economy of child sexual abuse. To gain access to certain closed online groups, pedophiles have to share pictures of new, previously unseen videos. In other words, to be able to watch videos of children being raped, they must rape children, film it, and post it online. The abuse is committed offline by a father, by an uncle, by a football coach, by a priest, by someone the child trusts or trusted. But because they post the videos and rapes online, internet companies can find them and report them, and police can rescue children. Based on one of these reports by internet companies, police in Sweden searched a suspect's hard drive, found evidence he was raping his stepdaughter. They saved her and put him in prison for 9 years. Another report in Sweden helped rescue 11 children, aged between 2 and 14 years old, when the crimes were committed. I can go on with this report. But in just 2 years, when the temporary legislation expires, these rescues will no longer be possible, because internet companies will no longer be allowed to detect child sexual abuse in Europe. So they can no longer send these reports. Police can no longer use them to rescue children and to stop these horrific crimes. Police will be blindfolded. Abused children will suffer in the dark. To stop this disaster from happening, I have presented a tough, unprecedented, and groundbreaking proposal to prevent and fight child sexual abuse. And do you think that Sweden could tell the big internet companies alone, as a member state, you must eliminate child sexual abuse from your services? It's not possible for a single country. But we can do it as the European Union, and we can actually set the global standard because we are so strong if we act together. So now member states and parliament must reach an agreement on my proposals before time's run out. The clock is ticking. And there are loud voices who oppose my legislation, I have to tell you that. Companies don't want to be regulated. Advocates with justified fears about privacy. And I ask them, what about the privacy of the children who relive the trauma day by day when these videos are alive on internet? Because their rapes they suffered have been posted online, their moment of the greatest terror shared for pleasure. We must show these children as a society, we support them and we protect them. We do all we can to rescue children, and we take these images and videos down. Children don't have power, but as adults, as a society, we do have power. As a union, we do have power. So let's use that power. I've been talking about dark things, but I want to end on a different note and on a different tone. War and crime are not happy topics, but I am happy to be back in Lund. I studied here at Lund University in the 80s. I studied math and physics mainly, but also some programming and chemistry and statistics. In these days, no one predicted. We had the Cold War, you remember? We were living under the threat of the Cold War. And no one predicted that a couple of years later, the Cold War would be over, the Berlin Wall down, and the Soviet Union in pieces. Countries turning into democracy. And I had, of course, no idea that I would be standing here today before you as a European Commissioner. Sweden was not even a member. And as a Commissioner of European Union, including former dictatorship in Central Eastern Europe from behind the Iron Curtain, that is part of the European Union today. I'm talking to you about our proudest moment when we welcomed millions of Ukrainian refugees, when we acted united, and we still do, towards Putin. So I want to say, especially to the students present here today, change may come when you least expect it. It's up to you to shape the future. Times may be dark, but you can turn on the light. So let's turn on the light. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Johansson. That's a very strong speech, and it's a showcase of your strong commitment to these difficult topics that is within your realm. Let's now open up for questions from the audience. Please raise your hand, and a hand microphone will be handed to you. Over to the left here. Keep on waving. There'll be a microphone runner coming up to you. And when you get the microphone, please push it firmly to your chin, stand up, state your name and your organization or your faculty.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and my name's Edgar. I'm a student here at Lund University. And I want to thank you so much for coming to Lund. And I have a question for you, as you may suspect. So I want to start off by saying that the level of solidarity with Ukraine and the swift actions of the EU have been truly commendable. The invasion of the country, or Ukraine, has also highlighted the need to reduce dependency on Russia, especially in terms of energy. So in light of this, I would like to know your thoughts on the recent gas deal between the EU and another country, not Russia, but Azerbaijan, which is an autocratic regime that is currently waging war on sovereign Armenian territory and committing the same types of atrocities and crimes that we also see in Russia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is a very difficult time where the energy is used as a weapon, and especially when it comes to gas. Sweden is not dependent very much on gas, but other member states are. So that's why the European Union had tried to find other agreements. And I had to admit, not only with the countries that are just democracies, that's for sure. But it's about also surviving, I should say, it's about surviving this winter. And I can assure you that the main thing that is going on now is actually reducing the use of gas as a whole and reducing the use of energy. And it's quite successful. It's a bit of a surprise why Sweden is not much part of this yet. But now the EU will actually force Sweden to be a part of it as well. Because we can do a lot by reducing, and also especially in the peak hours. Because in the peak hours is where we use the gas the most, because it's the extra thing. So we can do a lot on that. And I should say that I estimate that if we manage this winter, and I think we will. We have set a target to fill the gas supplies until the end of October with 80%, and it's already 85% filled. We have already reduced the gas consumption very much. So if we can manage this winter, the loser will be Putin, because he can't even sell his gas anymore through the Nord Stream or the other pipelines that exist. But it's true. We are also committing having some agreements with countries that are not all democracies. That's for sure.
Thank you for your question. I'd just like to add, I had the pleasure of interviewing the Vice President Timmermans this spring on a stage in Stockholm. And he said, why don't we all put a sweater on for the Ukraine this winter and just lower our temperature, indoor temperature, just a few degrees. I think that's a very beautifully and simple advice. So let's see here. We have a hand up here in the 1/4 row from front, striped shirt.
Thank you for the keynote, Minister. Am I audible? My name is Vatul. I'm from the School of Economics and Management, Lund University. And you talked about your proposal for regulating companies to make sure that they continue detecting and reporting child sexual abuse. And often we have seen where laws, similar laws exist, the issue is with making sure that the penalties and consequences are significant enough for the companies to do so. So what kind of penalties does your proposal envision for this?
Thank you.
Yes, I have put forward a proposal that is really groundbreaking. So that means that we make it mandatory for all companies to do safety by design, to do risk assessment, and if necessary, also detect and mandatory to report and remove. If they do not comply, the penalty can be up to 10% of the revenue.
Thank you. That could be lots of money.
Yeah.
The gentleman in the middle of the stage here to the right in the white shirt, please stand up.
Good morning. Scott Young from Eurasia Group. Madam Commissioner, given one, the massive shift in the geopolitical landscape with Ukraine and the refugee crisis that's unfolding there, two, Sweden's long-standing disinclination towards strategic autonomy and technological sovereignty, and three, the likely new coalition government in Sweden, how do you anticipate Sweden will maximize its 6-month EU Council presidency? Will we see a shift away from Sweden's traditional positions and priorities? If so, how? And what do you think Sweden will prioritize during its 6 months?
Thank you.
I think we do not even have a government in place in Sweden now, and I think it will be for the new Swedish government to answer that questions. But I can answer on my side that I will do everything in my power to help Sweden to have a successful presidency. And the way is also that a successful presidency is also very linked to a successful commission. So I hope that to be able to cooperate close with the new Swedish government. And of course, the first thing that I will do when the new government is in place is to call the new prime minister and ask for a live meeting with the whole government to discuss exactly these issues.
Thank you. We had a question here to this side. I think some hands went down. Oh, that was all the way in the back here. Sorry, that was before. There was a lady in the back here. All the way in the back? No? Maybe a gentleman. It's a little bit far back. Yes, keep your hand up, please. There you go.
I just see that it's only men so far.
Yeah, that's why I try to spot a lady. There's a woman over there. Excellent. Speak up, please.
Hi, I'm Gavin from Malmö University. You opened your speech with reference to the campaign of sexualized violence taking place in the Ukraine. And I was wondering if there are any special interests within the EU to assist refugees who have been victimized by sexual violence.
Yes, there are. We have special support, and also, of course, we collect evidence for war crimes, because this is a war crime. So we have a special task force also for collecting the war crime evidence. We are working closely together with the Ukrainian government. I had a call a few months ago with Olga Stefanishnya, the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, and we talked about, especially on this, using rape as a weapon in war. And she told me, we don't have the capacity for supporting all these traumatized and raped women. Can you help me to set up victims' centers to support? And when I was in Kiev in the beginning of August, she told me that they have now 4 of these centers are already in place with our money, and they are planning 11 more. So we are doing a lot on this, and I think it's important.
Thank you. To this side in the back. The young lady, here we go.
Good morning. I'm Anna Maglaperidze from Lund University, but most importantly, I'm from Georgia, 20% of which is currently occupied by Russia, and this Russian aggression and deborderization is a very problem in Georgia. It's an ongoing process. And I'm very glad that democratic society know about the recent things happening in Ukraine, because we did not have opportunity to raise our voice and let the world know about the Russian brutality in Georgia. This was happening in Georgia too, and not many people know it. My question is, do you think that at any stage developed society, not only EU, made a mistake not to learn on the example of Georgia and trust Russia again? Because this war in Ukraine, it is insane in 21st century, and Russia did this in Georgia too. So do you think it was somehow a mistake to trust Russia again? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it was a mistake. I think we've been naive to a large extent, actually. And it's extremely important that we not turn naive again. And that's why it's so important to keep the unity in the European Union. But we also have to see that Putin has been quite successful with his propaganda, with his trying to interfere with the democratic debate in several member states, saying that these high energy prices is not about the war, it's about the sanctions. It's not. He's also saying that, yeah, you can see your government is welcoming Ukrainian refugees, but they do not support your own citizens. He's trying to use this kind of narrative into destroying or interfering with the trust in governments and in the trust in the united European Union. So that's why it's so important that we need to fight his narrative, his propaganda, that we always have to remind ourselves what is at stake here, and that we have to keep united.
Thank you. Question here up front. So lots of exercise for the microphone runner here.
Hi, Sonja Irboy from Bylövs kommun. I'm wondering if you think that the unanimity vote in EU is going to be a problem now when we have EU states that are not democratic anymore. And one of the unanimity vote policies is security. And I'm wondering if you think that's going to be a problem in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is a good question. So first, unanimous decision is only in very limited occasions where it's necessary. For example, on sanctions and external relations. So that is something that is really very much debated, and I'm in favor of changing it to qualified majority votes. It's also when it comes to the budget. That's maybe a little bit more sensitive, but I think that is also one of those. So there are not so many areas where we have a unanimous voting, actually, in the treaty. So for security, for example, for internal security is qualified majority voting. Yeah, in migration is qualified majority voting. So this is. So I should not say it's a big problem because it's used in a very few cases. But in my view, especially when it comes to external relations and sanctions, it's important that we can speak with one voice. Yes, but it's also important that that voice is strong. And Putin, for example, one member state giving the opportunity to veto. In my view, makes us weaker. But this is, of course, for the member states and parliament and the citizens of the European to debate whether we should have a treaty change on this.
Thank you. We have time for one final question. Gentleman here on the third row with the glasses.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm George from Lund University. I used to work with the British government in the departments for education and the Department for Health and Social Care. And what you were saying about child sexual exploitation and trafficking, it really, took me back to that time, because one of the biggest facilitators that we saw of sexual exploitation and trafficking was actually the freedom of movement and the ability for victims to be trafficked across the continent with very few restrictions. Is there anything that the European Union and the Commission can do to hinder the ability of those to traffic, particularly young children, across the continent without actually hindering freedom of movement itself?
Yes. First, I think there are some links between trafficking human beings and the child sexual abuse, but there are a lot of differences as well, I must say, because most of these child sexual abuse have an online component, and that doesn't take into account any physical barriers, frontiers at all. But trafficking human beings is a big, big problem, and that was also a big threat that could raise also with the war of Ukraine. So we have stayed very vigilant, very active to fight this. So far, we have not seen a big rise, but it's too early to say that we managed. Half of the victims of trafficking in the European Union are being trafficked in the European Union and not coming from abroad. Actually, a big proportion, like 25–30%, are being trafficked in their own country. So trafficking is less about borders and more about vulnerable people being victims to these criminal groups. And I should say the most important way to fight it, because now this is a very, very profitable crime and very high level of impunity. Because if you traffic weapons or drugs, you can only sell it once. If you traffic a young woman, you can sell her body again and again and again and again and again and again. It never stops. So having a better alert on the member states, on the special knowledge, what we're working on is setting up specialized prosecutors, for example, for these specific crimes. We have a network also to help with the special expertise for the police that work on these investigations. We have expertise at Europol to help with this, and of course also on some campaigns actually that has been important to stay vigilant, like now, for example, with a lot of Ukrainians, women and children are entering into the European Union. So borders, some things we can do at the border. For example, now we are entering that we do the fingerprinting also for children, because that's one of the modus operandi. When they are trafficking children from outside the European Union, they use an old passport, a bit blurred, and taking the child. And then they go back, take the same passport, taking another child. So that's why we should now lower the age for the fingerprinting, for example, to the age of 6. And this is really to prevent also the trafficking of vulnerable children. Looking out also for unaccompanied minors among migrants is really also a group that is very, very risky of being victims of trafficking.
Well, thank you all of you for your excellent questions. And again, thank you, Commissioner Johansson. Fantastic to listen to you.